The United States of America, the world's first economic, political, military, technological, and cultural superpower, is undoubtedly the most influential nation of our era. This great country has managed to maintain world hegemony since the beginning of the 20th century, especially consolidating during the two world wars. But how did one of the many colonies of the United Kingdom become the great contemporary empire? Well, stay until the end of the video to know its history. It is estimated that the current US territory was populated from Asia between 12,000 and 40,000 years ago, passing through the Bering Strait. Various tribes and peoples settled throughout the country, and due to the immense territory, they rarely had contact with each other, so the various cultures were formed in a quite heterogeneous way with different languages, customs, and religions. Among them, the Anasazi in the south, the Inuit in Alaska, the Sioux, the Apache, among others. Over time, some tribes joined together and even formed states, among which the Iroquois Confederation stands out, which unified the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and Tuscarora tribes, and the Powhatan Confederation, both from the end of the 16th century. Others, like the Wabanaki Confederation, were established from the beginning of the 17th century. The current territory of the United States had been alien to Spanish expansion, who had already taken control of much of present-day Latin America, except for Florida, where they had settled around 1513. However, other Europeans would begin to settle in this vast territory. The first attempt was by the British in the colony of Roanoke in present-day North Carolina in 1585, which incidentally lasted about 5 years, and its disappearance is still a mystery. The first permanent British settlement would be founded in 1607, known as Jamestown in present-day Virginia, which thrived with the cultivation of tobacco, while the French would settle in Acadia in present-day Canada. The British settlers would begin friction with the Powhatan Confederation, with whom they would enter into combat, which were appeased after the marriage of settler John Rolfe and the daughter of Chief Powhatan Pocahontas. Yes, the same one you know from Disney. However, after the change of command, Chief Opechancanough would retaliate and carry out the Jamestown Massacre in 1622, killing 400 people, which represented a third of the total population. Despite this affront, the English settlers continued to migrate, thus consolidating the colony of Virginia, which would be the first official British colony in North America. After 2 more wars with the Powhatan, where they managed to capture Chief Opechancanough, the Confederation would begin its decline, unable to prevent the expansion of the British settlers after the Treaty of 1646. For this, the British were not the only ones to settle. For their part, the Dutch would found New York in 1625 in the current territory of New York, where they established a fort. This proximity led the British to confront the Dutch in the known Anglo-Dutch Wars. Various groups of British, known as the Puritans, continued to occupy more territories along the east coast of the United States, Plymouth and Boston, between 1620 and 1630 Connecticut in 1635. The colonies that were founded were based on a deep Christian faith, and in the first instance maintained peace with the tribes of the neighboring Iroquois and Wabanaki confederations. The French, for their part, would found Louisiana, a province that occupied the modern states of Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. It would later extend into the current Wyoming, Nebraska, South and North Dakota, Montana, Kansas, and Colorado. The rapid expansion was due to the lack of organized states that could defend the territory. By the beginning of the 1700s, British settlers would continue to expand until the territory would consolidate into the known 13 colonies: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Wow! This was already shaping the United States. By the year 1750, the population had already reached 1 million inhabitants, and the slaves imported from the Caribbean and Federative Republic of Brazil were already around 150,000. Yes, slavery was part of the society of the British colonists. Between 1756 and 1763, the 7 Years' War would break out, in which the great European powers would face each other both in Europe and in their colonies in Africa, India, and America. The front that concerned us in this war, North America, was the scene of the confrontation between the British Empire with the 13 colonies and supported by the Iroquois Confederation, and the Kingdom of France, with New France, supported by Spain, and the Wabanaki Confederation. The result, a British victory, after which present-day Canada from France and Florida from Spain are ceded to the United Kingdom, and Louisiana is ceded to the Spanish Empire through the Treaty of Fontainebleau of 1764. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay updated with more content. By the 1770s, the population of the 13 colonies was 2.5 million inhabitants. After the 7 Years' War, and due to the high debt that the United Kingdom ended up with, the Crown would raise taxes on the exports of the 13 colonies, which generated general discontent among the colonists with the new impositions. The response to this discontent was the creation of pro-nationalist organizations like Sons of Liberty and subsequent protest acts like the Boston Tea Party, where a group of colonists disguised as Indians threw the tea cargo of British ships into the sea. In response to this, the tensions made us wait, and in 1775, the War of Independence would break out, in which, with the support of Spain and France, the 13 colonies would declare their independence in 1776. The United States of America was born. The war would extend until 1783, the year in which the United Kingdom would recognize this independence. The first American annexation would be the territories of the Iroquois Confederation in 1779, reaching an agreement with the tribes of this state. For this, George Washington, who had been appointed as Commander-in-Chief of the Revolutionary Army during the war, became the first president of the nation after the Constitution of 1787, thus establishing itself as one of the first democracies in the world and the oldest federal constitution that is still in force. Washington would be succeeded by John Adams and later by Thomas Jefferson, both also considered as founding fathers of the United States. During Jefferson's administration, the Louisiana Purchase was made in 1804 from Napoleon for about $15 million, and in the 1810, Florida was acquired from Spain. In these early years, the United States adopted a foreign policy of non-intervention, staying out of major events such as the Napoleonic Wars, and instead focusing on pacifying internal revolts from natives like the Cherokees and the Tecumseh, from whom they obtained the territory of Indiana. Although in 1812, a war would break out against Canada still under British rule due to some discrepancies with the Crown, but in the long run ended in status quo antebellum. By 1818, the joint administration of the Oregon Territory would begin, which had been in dispute. Americans, French, Spanish, British, and Russians sought to control it. That historical territory included the current states of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, in addition to British Columbia of present-day Canada. The controversies would cease after the treaties of 1790, 1818, and 1821, after which the joint administration of the United States and the United Kingdom was agreed upon. While the first American rulers were more concerned with internal policies that led to rapid economic and social growth in the country, their first external confrontations were based mostly on combating international piracy against Berber pirates from present-day Algeria and Morocco, as well as Greek pirates in the Mediterranean Sea, and also support to other maritime powers such as the Netherlands and Indonesia. With this, the United States demonstrated that it was gaining control of the seas, which would allow it to protect foreign trade and therefore continue with its growth. It seems they had it clear from a very young age. Do you remember the Oregon Territory? Well, after the 1846 treaty with the United Kingdom, the territory would be divided in two. The southern part would come under American sovereignty, and the northern part under British sovereignty, which in the future would be Canadian territory. And with this, it seems that the expansionist awakening of the United States had begun. That same year, the war against Mexico would begin, shortly after having annexed the Republic of Texas. The war began after the Thornton Affair, where 11 American soldiers died. This was the trigger that President James Polk used to declare war on Mexico. As a result, the United States won and annexed almost half of the Mexican territory, which currently corresponds, apart from Texas, to the present territories of California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. All of this was rectified in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. As the expansion and prosperity of the great nation increased, so did consciousness. Part of this growth was due to the fact that the United States had become the world's leading exporter of slaves, due to the demand for labor in agricultural work. In 1861, the renowned President Abraham Lincoln would assume office, whose abolitionist ideas frightened the southern states, where slave labor was most used. That same year, the southern states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee would declare their independence, forming the Confederate States of America. This would mark the beginning of the Civil War, known as the Civil War, where President Lincoln managed to impose himself on the separatist states, ending the war in 1865, after which the states would be reintegrated and slavery would be abolished. Although Lincoln wouldn't be able to enjoy his achievement much, as he would be assassinated just a few days after the war ended. In the following years, the United States went through a stage known as Reconstruction, where reintegration and reconstruction policies were developed after the war. With the purchase of Alaska from the Russia Empire in 1877, the United States would go from having a territory of just under 1 million square kilometers when it gained independence, to more than 9 million square kilometers. All of this in less than a century. Wow, they sure loved land. Their last acquisitions would occur in 1898, following the annexation of Hawaii and the Spanish-American War, where after the sinking of the Maine, the United States would declare war on Spain. After achieving a victory, having taken Cuba, Puerto Rico, in addition to buying the Republic of the Philippines and some possessions in Oceania. With all these victories, the United States began the 20th century already with the status of a world power. In December 1913, the Federal Reserve would be created, that is, the Central Bank of the United States, independent of the government, and that would guard the reserves of the national banks, that is, the money that goes out. This was during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. And the conspiracy moment arrived. From this moment on, the finances of the United States, and therefore of the rest of the world, would be under the control of the big families that control the Federal Reserve, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and the J.P. Morgans. That's why, after the United States' participation in World War I between 1917 and 1918, which it entered after the sinking of the Lusitania, which, by the way, reminds me of the Maine President Wilson, who received support from these families during his campaign, promotes his 14 points, which was the germ of the creation of the League of Nations, and which would later become the United Nations, in addition to establishing a new international and colonial policy that remains to this day. This smells like the New World Order to me. It's also worth noting that the United States, on the side of the Allies, was the big winner of this war, as its territory remained intact, and it made millions with the sale of weapons to the European powers, in addition to the loans. Yes, loans. The more debt, the more interest for the Federal Reserve System. End of the conspiracy rant. Beware, it was merely a rant. You can leave your opinion on the matter in the comments below. But well, the prosperity of the United States was at its peak during the happy 20s, which was overshadowed by the crisis of 1929, which led to the Great Depression. Yes, the economy of the United States and almost the entire world collapsed. although it would progressively recover in the mid-30s after the interventionist policy proposed by President Franklin Roosevelt, known as the New Deal. By 1939, World War II would break out, where the United States would enter the conflict in 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. During this war, it sent support to the Allies for the liberation of France during D-Day and the subsequent advance on the Western Front, but its main antagonist was the Empire of Japan, which, due to its high resistance, would not sign its surrender until the attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, President Truman you do, right? But well, a parenthesis before continuing. Shortly before the end of the war, the United States would sign the Bretton Woods agreements with 44 nations, which would establish the creation of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, in addition to establishing the US dollar as the international reference currency. Yes, that's why your mortgage loans and ticket purchases may be in dollars. And who do you think benefits from every dollar transaction we make? Yes, me. And me. And me too. With the end of the World War II, the United States consolidates itself as the world's first superpower after implementing the Marshall Plan. Only the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics could stand up to it. Yes, the Cold War had begun. And what was the Cold War? Broadly speaking, it was an economic, political, social, military, scientific, and even sports confrontation between the two superpowers that would form the two blocs, the capitalist West and the communist East. The West, led by the United States, would create North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance with Canada and several European countries, in opposition to the Warsaw Pact of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the countries of Eastern Europe. Basically, it was called Cold because it never led to an armed conflict between the two nations, but rather a series of proxy wars, including the Korean War, where the two countries were separated and have not signed a peace treaty to this day, the Yom Kippur War, where Israel faced several countries of the Arab League, and the Vietnam War, one of the few defeats of the United States. During this period, the presidency of John F. stands out. Kennedy, who faced the Cuban Missile Crisis, where a Third World War almost broke out due to the discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba. But in the end, both powers reached an agreement. He is also known for having announced the secret necessities. The Cold War would not end until 1991 with the disintegration of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Capitalism had triumphed, and the United States would maintain world hegemony along with its European allies who had already recovered over time. During the 90s, the United States positioned itself as the only superpower. In 2001, the September 11th attacks occurred, where Al-Qaeda terrorist groups attacked the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. Small appearances with Paranoid, I read in the description the two faces of this attack below. In the end, the point with this would start the war against Somalia and Syrian Arab Republic, against Islamic extremist groups like Al-Qaeda Islamic State and Al-Nusra, which over time have not been able to persevere. In addition, the interventionism of the United States would continue in search of the fight for democracy, in which it supported the overthrow of great dictators like Gaddafi in Libyan Arab Jamahiriya and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. The last elected presidents, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, would face a scenario where new emerging powers would begin to confront Russia in the political and military fields and People's Republic of China in the economic field. In fact, many analysts already call this the trade war between People's Republic of China and the United States, which at this rate, the Asian giant would surpass in a couple of decades. So could this be the end of the United States' global hegemony? Do you think we are living or that a new Cold War is approaching? Don't forget to leave your comments on this, as I would like to know your opinion. And if you liked this video, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to my channel to stay updated with more content. Until next time.